And first of all, just from my perspective on this, in the state of Utah especially, judges don't like that.
What are you looking for?
There are those college level judges and those Lincoln Douglas debaters that go back and judge that think it's great. But in the state of Utah, really the traditional way of Lincoln Douglas debate is what's going to win you your rounds, especially when it comes to the region and state level. There are a few tournaments I would say that are probably going to be more progressive specifically, and that is the Bingham tournament and the Alpha tournament, because those are TOC big tournaments. And they're bringing these kids that really want to perform on that TOC circuit from across the country to come and get their bids at those tournaments. But everything else, I would say, probably should focus more on the traditional style of Lincoln Douglas debate, which is here's a value, here's a way to measure that value, aka criteria, and this is my case to prove or to show that I'm correct, right? There are some strategies to have the traditional debater beat the progressive debater. If you'd like to get into those, we can get into those towards the end of this. And if we don't have a chance, I'll let you come and pick this up. I say whenever somebody's going progressive and you have a traditional debater and they don't know what to do, tell them to go postal. Pick one of these words, P-O-S-T-A-L, and use that strategy. For example, solvency. If the AF is trying to show a traditional Lincoln Douglas debate, and the neg runs this K, or this critique that says, we shouldn't even debating this topic because it's just promoting this racial stereotype or whatnot, then the AF just goes back and argues, in addition to my affirmative case, the neg really doesn't solve for anything. They're just trying to say words that don't apply to this specific resolution. So feel free to grab that. Also, for those of you that may be newer to debate, I've got a kind of a basic debate LD packet. This has a debate template, very, very simple, especially for your very, very novice Lincoln Douglas debaters. They can just write the words in. And then behind that is a flow template, which flowing is probably one of the most overlooked skills in debate. Debaters don't know how to do it. They just think it's writing down ideas as they go along. And that's not the case. There are still some judges out there that really, really, really like to go to the flow and make sure that every argument is addressed. And if they're not writing down those details, then they're going to miss it. And then I have a couple documents tied into that with a list of values and criteria. So how the values that we're looking at in Lincoln Douglas debate and how we measure those values. So that's kind of the basics of Lincoln Douglas. The timing looks like the affirmative has the kind of the advantage here. The timing goes 6-3, 7-3, 4-6-3 with the AF ending at 3 minutes. What the neg has as a benefit is the ability to rebut in their first speech, in their constructive speech. So one of the other things that I always try to coach Lincoln Douglas debaters on when they get started, in affirmative speeches, you need to use your entire time, especially in that constructive speech, that full 6 minutes. 6, 3, 7, 3, 4, 6, 3. Thanks. So I have seen multiple times where the affirmative doesn't use that full 6 minutes, which means one of two things. Number one, they're going too fast, and they should probably slow down. And number two, they could probably build up their case a little bit more. And oftentimes what that means is putting more steps into the thinking process. How did I get from point A to point B, or point C, or point D in this argument? With a negative constructive speech, they should only be going no more than 5 minutes and 30 seconds and using at least 1.5 minutes to rebut the AF in that first speech. Yes?
What are the time frames for middle school?
That is a great question. I believe it's split in half completely. So I think it's like 3 minutes, 1.5 minutes, or 3 minutes, maybe 2 minutes, and then 3.5 minutes, 2 minutes, 2, 3, 4, 1.5. Yeah, if you can do that, that'd be great. But Lincoln Douglas debate, that brings up an interesting point. If somebody's really getting into debate for the first time, Lincoln Douglas is a great place to start. So I taught both middle school and high school debate, and I would always start both my middle school debaters and my new do high school debaters with Lincoln Douglas. Because number one, it's a one-on-one, they don't have to really worry about that partnership right now. And they get to through the whole process. And number two, it really focuses on people, they're being able to think about what is important, right? So when we say Lincoln Douglas is a value debate, it's all about what do we value more as a society. One other caveat or distinction with Lincoln Douglas debate, we don't necessarily have to prove solvency in Lincoln Douglas debate. It could be a morality debate where we're looking at what should we be better at? What should we be doing as a society? Not that, oh, this would be great, but we can't afford it. This would be great, but you're never going to get people to do this. That really doesn't matter in Lincoln Douglas debate because it is about that. Yes, do you have a question?
I'm sorry, no, Miss Rowdy just told me to come in here under the meeting.
Oh, okay, sorry. We're going to have an example here in about 15 minutes. So, take a seat.
Sorry.
Okay. So, when we look at values, for example, what do we value most? If we look at this resolution here, which is one of my more favorite ones, just because of I really love studying this topic. The United States criminal justice system ought to focus more on rehabilitation over retribution. So the AF is going to show we need to focus on rehabilitation. The neg is going to argue no, we need to focus more on retribution, right? That's pretty simple. But we're not just saying we need to focus on rehabilitation because this, and this, and retribution because this, and this. What do we value most? Why would somebody on the AF say we need to focus more on rehabilitation? What do we value as a society to make that more important? The individual. Okay? How about mercy? Do we as a society value mercy? Do we as individuals value mercy? Right? I have done so many stupid things in my life. I'm so grateful there's mercy out there. Police officer pulls you over for speeding and says, I don't want to give you a ticket today, I just want to make sure you're driving safe. Did that police officer show mercy? And how many of us would argue if we're being pulled over for speeding, oh, the police officer should give us a ticket and make us pay? I mean, there might be there are a few out there. But as a society, we expect and value mercy, right? What about on the next side? What do we value that would show that we need retribution more than rehabilitation? Justice. Justice in Lincoln Douglas debate is extremely common. We are constantly looking at what is justified, what is just. And there's two ways to look at justice. One is you owe me, so therefore you have to pay. I deserve justice because I am not whole. And one other common version of justice in Lincoln Douglas debate is fairness. Everything is equal. Men and women should have equal access to everything. Racial should have equal access to everything. And if there is structural violence out there that is preventing a gender, a race, or anybody from being completely whole, we would consider that injustice. One of my favorite philosophers to really go on that's really, really simple to follow is a guy named John Rawls. John Rawls talks a lot about justice as fairness, equality as fairness, and it's used at a basic level of debate, especially in Lincoln Douglas, it's used extensively. So, Justice as Fairness is his main book. It's a pretty simple read, and a lot of great debaters will use John Rawls as an example of why we need justice. All right. Any questions up to this point? Am I going too fast, too slow?
You're doing great.
Thank you. It's been a long time since I've been able to focus on debate. I miss it a lot, actually. I thought I would be getting my weekends back, but as you know, I'm here, so every weekend almost.
It's not even season yet.
Pettit has a weekend?
Very Christmas, pretty much. All right. So a couple of the things that come up when I teach Lincoln Douglas debate is how do I teach values? How do we teach people to weigh values against each other? I usually will give them some examples of this, different topics. You can even do this in a spar format very, very simply and give them that opportunity to practice just very informal debate and have it focused on values. But you may pick out two values and say, okay, in fact, let's do it. Somebody give me a value. If you can't find one, just look at the back of the page here. Give me a value off this back sheet. Anybody? Anybody? when do we have, and this is how I would teach this to students, when do we ever have a situation where we have to choose between valuing community over privacy?
Like if you have nosy neighbors.
Nosy neighbors?
The, Google Maps.
Google Maps. How does Google Maps benefit the community? You can get around easier. What about privacy? Not so much, right? What about when it comes to the national, let's say the NSA data center out here? What is that NSA data center built to do? Besides spy on all of our phone calls and stuff. That was a policy topic a few years ago. What's that? Gather information. Why?
Promote national security.
Promote national security. Now, does that value, as a community, do we value national security? We do. Do we value privacy? Right? So you can have your students draw a line and have everybody come up and say, here we value privacy 100%, here we value community and safety 100%. Where do you sit on that line? How many do you think are going to be here and here on the extremes? Very, very few. Then you start asking why. Why is it that you're willing to give up some of your privacy to protect safety, right? It's almost like that social contract theory. In fact, it's pretty much the exact same thing. So if you get your students thinking in this mindset, value versus value, then you're starting to go down that road that Lincoln-Douglas debate was meant to go down. As a society, as a group of people, what should we value? Not what is possible, not what is important right now, because somebody can say, well, we just had, we have this terrorism thing going on. We need to value this. But in the Lincoln-Douglas debate, is it more important to discuss what is reality or what is important? What is important? And that's what the debaters should be saying. A couple other things with Lincoln-Douglas debate, and this is just debate in general, it's kind of my soapbox. Debate is not me versus you. I am not hitting this person. We are having a civilized discussion in which we put our values forward, and then a judge is determining, okay, based upon what I heard, I think the neg is correct, I think the aff is correct. And this is where a lot of debaters get into trouble, is they're constantly trying to think, how am I going to defeat this person, not how am I going to convince the judge that my position is correct. When they do that, they lose their offense. So yeah. Perhaps the most difficult thing to teach in Lincoln-Douglas debate is the criteria. Or as people like to call it, criterion. That's just a really fancy word for how we're going to measure. What is the system? What is the machine we're going to put these values through in order to determine which one is correct? It is really, really nice when both sides come up with the same measurement system. If they both say, we're going to use utilitarianism. I'm not a big fan of utilitarianism, but that's a measuring system, right? What is best for the society as a whole? What is better for 50.000000001% versus the 49.9999999%? Yeah, that's utilitarianism. We're going to do the greatest amount of good for the most amount of people kind of thing. So the way to teach this the best is to simply try to get them to picture that scale inside their head. When you have two values, such as community versus privacy, how are we going to measure which one is more important? What is the judge going to use? And this is kind of one of the most important things about Lincoln-Douglas debate, especially in traditional debate that is forgotten, is one of the first things you need to do in your constructive speech is to convince the judge that your measuring system is more valuable than your opponent's measuring system. And again, I'm not saying this opponent's measuring system is horrible, don't listen to that. You're saying the right reason to measure this way is because in society today, or especially for this topic, we really truly need to know what is going to produce a better outcome. So for this topic here, the United States criminal justice system ought to focus more on rehabilitation over retribution, you can say, we're going to measure this based upon consequentialism. What are the consequences? And if I'm going to say, I'm arguing on behalf and I say rehabilitation, I'm going to say if we need to create a society where people can be their best. So I'm going to, let's say we value on the F here, with rehabilitation, we value the individual. Everybody is everybody has value, right? Even the person sitting in jail has value. Versus retribution, we may be speaking of justice. Alright, sorry. It's going fast here. So, when I say consequentialism, I'm going to say if we focus on rehabilitation under a consequentialism idea, they're more likely to go out into society when they're released and just commit crimes again. We're not solving for anything. And that doesn't even bring justice. Because somebody who's committing a crime does not believe in justice. They're not even treating people as equals. They're treating somebody different. And so it's more important to value rehabilitation because we believe the individual is important. That's the value we're focusing on. And we're weighing this through a consequential standpoint. Statistically, we know this is what happens, A, B, C, and D. On the other side, if we look at consequentialism, what happens if we don't give people punishment in prison?
They don't recognize anything they did was wrong.
I see this every day at the grocery store. No, I see this in public all the time though. Little kids, right? Parents are too embarrassed or maybe don't want to correct them in public, so they just let the kid do what they want to do. As an educator, I'm sure you've all seen the parents that are, my kid doesn't do that, it's okay, my kid whatever, right? So consequentialism may be bad on this side as well. Now, the neg with justice may be focusing on something else that we value, and that is due process. So we may say we value due process, and we're going to weigh due process by how? Consequentialism. This packet you have that I gave you, there's some really good criteria in there. I would recommend just for the sanity of your students to limit their criterion to just a few, so they're not trying to memorize all these different things. The big ones used in Lincoln Douglas debate are utilitarianism, consequentialism, and deontology, which is that, I'll just read it from here, the philosophical perspective based on the concept that acts or rules are acceptable based upon their ability to satisfy overriding moral principles. So deontology, that's where, what is the better decision? You have the train coming down the tracks, you've got 2 people on this track, 4 people on this track, train comes down, which track do we send the train down? Well, killing people is bad, we know that, but sometimes we kill this person, we save these people. And then you get into war, which is pretty common. So, another thing I'd recommend for those Lincoln Douglas debaters that really want to get into it is for them to start reading philosophy, starting with the very basics of traditional classical philosophy, moving on to philosophical principles such as just warfare theory, looking at moral luck. There's some great information out there just about modern philosophy and how it fits into things. Any questions at this point?
Can you email a copy of this out to the Utah debate coaches?
Sure. Yeah, I'll actually send it to Tanya and have her send it out. I have have another document that is the LD handbook. It's about 87 pages long.
Is it the one that's from the NSDA?
No, it's, I think it might be part of the debate Bible.
Okay.
Well, that's the name of the book. And it actually gives you some examples of what we call the novice topic, which is every fall we do for the novice Lincoln Douglas debaters. In democracy, civil disobedience is morally justified. That's classic, Martin Luther King versus civil rights, Gandhi versus what's going on. So, civil disobedience, what does that mean? Any questions on teaching criterion? Because that seems to be the hardest thing for students to understand. All right. So I'm going to invite our assistants to come up and give us a quick demonstration. What I want you to do as we do this is I want you to, number one, write down any questions that you may have. I think one is going to go traditional, right? And you're going progressive? Okay. This happens a lot. Which is great. Keep in mind, traditional debaters don't automatically lose to progressive debaters. You're debating for the judges. So, they're going to come up and they're going to go to this point here. We're going to have them do their constructive speeches, cross-examination, constructive speech, cross-examination, and write down the questions you have. Afterwards, let's talk about three things. Number one, values. Even progressive debate oftentimes has values. It's hidden. They don't necessarily come out and say, my value is this, my criterion is this, but they still have a value that they're usually fighting for. So try to get down their value, their criterion, and then any questions that you have. All right, you ready? You ready? Got timers and everything you need? Okay, I'm going to sit over here.
Your game's still playing. Hey, it's not copyright.
You probably can use this. And remind them what the resolution is. So,
Yeah, I see. It's not one of the ones that's on the board.
yeah, that's why I was hoping that we
I
get
can
that
read it.
before. Okay, can
I
you read
have
it for
it.
him?
Resolved in a democracy, the public's right to resolved in a democracy, the public's right to know ought to be valued above the right of privacy for candidates. That's not the resolution that we prepared.
What are you prepared for?
That's the resolution that I was prepared. Yeah, so I have, in the United States, reporters ought to have the right to protect the identity of confidential sources.
Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We have two different topics. So you're planning to go in F, right, Sarah?
Yeah.
Can you give us an example of a traditional F?
Yeah.
And I'm going to cut you off probably halfway through. That's okay? Okay. And then what we're going to do is we're going to discuss that really quickly, and then we're going to go to your progressive side. We're going to talk about the postal. Is that okay for everybody? All right. Let's not blame each other for everybody's problems.
No, it's her
Okay.
teachers.
Let's go.
Okay. All right. It is because I believe that the candidates have the moral obligation to disclose to the public in order to reduce political corruption, allow voters to elect prepared candidates, and to hold candidates accountable for their personal behavior, that I am proud to affirm the resolves in a democracy, the public's right to know ought to be valued above the right of privacy of candidates. The value for today's debate is democratic governance. New York University, Shima, democratic governance is the range of process through which society reaches consensus on, implements regulations, human rights, laws, policies, and social structures, in pursuit of justice, welfare, and environmental protection. Democratic governance brings before the question of how society organizes itself to ensure equality of opportunity and equality, social and economic justice for all citizens. Stryfer-Rubel-Fag in 2006. On any plausible conception of democratic government, citizens must have the right to vote and is therefore morally problematic if voters do not have access to important facts about the matters that they vote on. Contention 1. Voters have the right to know who donates to a candidate's political campaign under democratic governance. Subpoint 8. Undisclosed financial contributions compromise federal and local elections. Burgam 2015. Political contributions are following in large amounts to widely overlooked destinations, local elections. Although these races often do not receive the headlines of their state and federal counterparts, the election results can have a great effect on people's everyday lives. School curriculum, zoning, and tax code are just some examples of policy determined by elected local boards, councils, and executives who carry out local governance. Knowing who funded their campaigns is an essential component of maintaining an effective and accountable democracy. So essentially what we're seeing in this piece of evidence is that a large amounts of money flowing into a local elections campaign will result in changes in everyday school life, like the school curriculum, zoning, and tax codes are just some examples of it. So we have the right, we deserve the right to know who is funding these campaigns so that we know how it will affect our lives in these situations. Subpoint B, occurring campaign practices allowed undisclosed campaign contributions, including super PACs. Square 2016. Super PACs are super PACs, the more formidable big money vehicles that emerge from the Citizens United decision, can accept unlimited contributions, but need only file donors' information quarterly in general election years, and on a semi-annual basis in odd-numbered years. As a result, the identity of the largest donors to super PACs cannot be determined until months after the contributions were made. The picture is no brighter with the so-called secret money groups, organizations such as 501c4 welfare groups, social welfare groups that are not required to disclose their donors under current IRS rules, despite increased levels of political activity. The problem is a political system in which the overwhelming majority of political contributions come from a tiny number of individuals. So essentially that the people that are being donated little money is being donated to are not getting as well known as people who have a lot of donors that are undisclosed. Therefore, the people who have bigger donors that will buy them into picking things certain way are being left undisclosed, and the voters have no idea about it. So under the criterion of the right to vote, we have the right to deserve to know who is funding these campaigns. That way we know how it will serve, especially the larger donors that can buy a politician's way into how they affect the school curriculum and zoning and taxes. My contention to the release of candidates' health information is needed to make informed voting decisions. Subpoint A, the lack of knowledge about health of political candidates undermines the democratic process. Stryfer-Rubel-Fag in 2006. If voters have a right that their valid consent be obtained, and if consent is not valid unless it is informed, it follows that voters have a right to be informed, necessary to have the information necessary to make informed voting decisions. If a certain kind of medical information are necessary for making informed voting decisions, voters have a right to that medical information. The Wilson case is clearest in this regard. His illness resulted in the effective disenfranchisement of the entire American people who had no idea that their vote for Wilson would give the power to make presidential decisions to his wife. So essentially this person who didn't disclose that he had a medical disorder before running for president and died during presidency left the decisions up to his wife. Well, he didn't exactly die, but he was unfit to make these decisions. And if the voters had known about it, then they wouldn't have chosen him. Therefore, they would have had a stronger president, one who actually was able to make decisions.
Sorry, can you stop there? Just trying to get some time back. Quickly, what's the value? Democratic governance. Why is that a value? What's another word we can use? Just one word. Democracy. Yeah. We value democratic governance. Okay? Now the criterion that you used is valid. It works. And what was that? Right to vote. Why is that a measurement system for democracy?
Because that's what democracy's about.
Yeah, if we don't have the right to vote, can a democracy exist? So we talked about criterion kind of as a scale, measure value versus value. What she's used as a criterion that says, we're going to put it into this machine, so we're going to put the resolution into the machine. And if we value this, we're going to get the outcome. But if we don't value this, what's going to happen? We will not have democracy, right? So that's the second way, and that, I think, Sarah, for bringing that up, that's the second way you can use a criterion. One is to value or measure value versus value, pretty much kind of the CBA, cost-benefit analysis type of thing. And the other one is, we're going to put this into the machine. The machine is, in order for democracy to exist, we need to have the right to vote. And if we don't uphold the resolution, the right to vote will not exist. Therefore, democracy would fall. Okay. Couple things that she did really, really well is, as she was reading her cards, she stated the author and the date, which is one thing that's oftentimes forgotten. Even in Lincoln Douglas debate relies upon cards just like everybody else. But you need to make sure that it's sourced and graded. Another thing she did very, very well is what we call signposting, where she was able to clearly state this is the contention. Contention 1, this. Subpoint A, this. A subpoint is a kind of a subcontention that supports that contention, right? One other thing that she did well is after she read her cards and she read through her case, what did she do?
She restated it to us in language we could understand.
She restated it in her own words for the judge's benefit. This is how this is applicable. This is how it ties back into the value. This is how it ties back into the resolution in general. A strategy that a lot of debaters sometimes are afraid to use, but can be very, very valuable, especially for the progressive debater that's speaking extremely fast, is, can you recite that in your own, so cross-examination, can you recite contention 1 in your own words? And sometimes they can't. They're really, really good at reading a card very, very quickly, but they don't even really understand what that card means. And then following up with a really kind of snarky remark, if my opponent can't necessarily say what that card means, then the judge has to say, I'm assuming the judge can't either. This is why my position is better on that one. So that's kind of a strategy. Okay. Any questions about traditional debate? Really good resources for that. The NSDA publishes their national final every year. You can go back. And so the NSDA is traditional value criterion Lincoln Douglas debate. They do not go fast. They stick to the script essentially, to that format that you have in that little template. That's essentially the NSDA circuit of debate.
Do LDers need physical cards?
Everybody should be able to produce a physical card.
Okay.
Now, so are you asking versus virtual cards?
No, like just that proof. So at any time,
So
she calls it.
here's my policy on that I've always told my teams. You should always have a separate document that you can hand over to your opponent with the cards on them. Do not hand them your case, or do not hand them your phone or your computer. That has caused so many problems because what it opens up is, even though the person may not be using the internet, the other opponent will say, oh, they're connected to the Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
They're using the internet during round. And it becomes more of a debate against somebody breaking the rules. Or what I have seen multiple times have happened, they will look at that information really quickly, but instead of reading that card, they're starting to read down. They'll start reading through rebuttal strategies or counter cards that they have. If they're flashing information back and forth, it takes a lot. I hate that. I really, really do. It takes up so much time, and I, as a judge, really, really hate that because I sit in the hallway for 20 minutes, and then they come in like, oh, we need 20 minutes to flash our evidence back and forth. One of the downsides of that is they are giving them their case and all their cards, and those debaters will take that back to their team. And all of a sudden, all these strategies and information that your team has collaborated on now belong to the other team as well. We'll just keep that copy, yes.
RPF team did that and they got hacked.
So,
You just ask for it back at the end of the round, or that is theirs to keep?
well, if usually what happens is they put it on a flash drive and put it on their computer, they save a copy of that case over there, and then they get it back. And so one way to overcome that, if you have to do the flashing, if that's the thing with policy, I don't get it, but it's starting to actually happen in Lincoln Douglas, is only have your constructive case to flash over to them on that flash drive. Don't flash over your constructive case, every card that you've collected, every strategy your team has talked about. Just don't do that.
Can you have just your cards that you used in that constructive case? Like then that's what you can flash over to them?
Yep.
That's mostly what they ask for, is just the cards that you have. So if you, I know a friend who did this, she cut out each of her cards out of her case and just handed them the cards.
I think as a paper works.
That's what I'm thinking.
And it's actually really beneficial to the judge, which is another thing I'd recommend, and we'll go to yours right after this, so get ready. When you give the opponent a card, offer it for the judge as well. So if you have 2 copies of a card on a piece of paper, and you know the opponent's going to ask for it, anything you give to the opponent, ask the judge, would you like to see that as well?
And the opponent gives it back after, right?
They should.
Yeah.
If they don't, you ask for it.
But judges really, really appreciate that. And judges oftentimes don't admit that they don't know what's going on. Especially in somebody talking very, very quickly. They'll sit there and nod their head, and they have no idea what's going on. And so they miss it completely. They just miss the constructive speech, usually. And then the rest of the debate's like, who looked better, essentially, at the end.
Well, this person kind of made a little sense.
Yeah, this person kind of made a little sense. Oh, I started to understand it in cross-examination, but they really don't understand the constructive speech. So another strategy, and this is again kind of a backhanded thing, but to say, Judge, they wrote it so fast I didn't understand it. I don't know if you did, but I'm having a hard time with this. So if I don't understand exactly what they're saying, please let me know. And then the judge is like, wow, if the debater didn't understand it, then I can kind of admit, I didn't really understand what happened. All right, you ready?
And to build rapport with the judge.
Okay, so this is going to be more progressive. So I want you to do the same thing. I want you to try to find a value and a criterion that she may have embedded inside of her case. And then I want you to write down any questions that you have. And then if we should have a few more minutes after this to quickly go through the postal and talk about some strategies.
So is it okay if I state my value criterion?
Yeah, that's fine. So that's going to be an easy assignment.
And then is it okay if I talk fast?
Yeah. No, I want you to do this like you would do in competition.
Okay. So I will be talking pretty fast. So ready? As a negation, I stand in affirmation of the resolution which states in the United States, reporters ought to have the right to protect the identity of confidential sources. However, I disagree with the affirmative side and her arguments for the fact of the matter that the United States due process of anonymity is inadequate, and for that reason will be offering a counterplan. Observation 1. I'm taking a more progressive route for this debate rather than a traditional path. This includes a negative accepting the affirmative's harms and the negation having a plan. My varying criterion for this round are as follows: value, paternalism, criterion, categorical, imperative. Definitions for further clarification throughout the round, I will define the following terms. Ought, mandatory, the context requires it. Reporters. A person who reports a decision to questions of law in the face of the judge in the several courts of law and equity. Protect. A legal or other formal measure intended to preserve civil liberties and rights. Confidential sources. A person who provides information to a law enforcement agency or to a journalist on the express or implied guarantee of anonymity. Confidentiality is protected both under the Federal Freedom of Information Act and under the First Amendment. Paternalism, not to be confused with the author, is the encroaching of an individual's autonomy under the auspices of having that person's best interest in mind. Categorical imperative, in Kantian ethics, an unconditional moral obligation that is binding in all circumstances and is not dependent on a person's inclination or purpose. Counterplan, reporters ought to have the right to protect the identity of confidential sources in the United States, but only if we go about it the way that the United Kingdom goes about their due process of anonymity. Convention 1, anonymity, report restrictions, reporting restrictions, cps.gov.uk. The power under Section 46 only can be exercised on application by the prosecution or defense. The court must apply a two-stage test to determine whether a witness is eligible for the protection along much of the same lines as an application for special measures on an adult under Section 16 or Section 17 of the UDCA, namely, is the witness eligible for protection and is a reporting direction likely to improve the quality of the evidence given by the witness. Prosecutors should be sure that this is made clear to potentially eligible witnesses that this is not an anonymity provision and that unless other relevant special measures are granted, those present in court will be able to see and hear the witness. For 11, start quote, a 15-year-old Harvard girl who in Jefferson Parish prosecutors accused in a second-degree murder case spent a night in jail after she refused to testify against the accused killer Wednesday. Silence apparently based in their fear of the defendant or his family. Pettit, who was only 13 years old when Redmond was shot several times, was sitting at the witness stand only feet from Williams, 18, while members of his family sat in the audience yards behind him. And refusal to testify led Judge June Dansford of the 24th Judicial Court to send the jury out of the courtroom and arrange for a public defender, Graham Bosworth, to provide legal advice to the teenager, but after conferring privately with Bosworth, Pettit again refused to testify. Are you refusing to testify and answer our questions? Asked Assistant Director Attorney Sunny Funk, who was prosecuting Williams with David Huff. That's correct. Team said Dansford then held her team in contempt of court and sentenced her to 6 months in jail, the maximum for contempt. End quote. Contention 2. Categorical imperative achieves my value of paternalism with 3 moral obligations. 1. Actions must be regulated by the good. Amendment Kingsburg 63. We are obliged to be moral. Morality implies an actual promise, otherwise it could not impose any obligation upon us. We owe obedience only to those who can protect us. Morality alone cannot protect us. 2. Values must be rational and reasonable. Amendment Kingsburg 29. But these considerations as to what is desirable in respect of a whole state that is what is good and useful are based on reason. Reason therefore provides laws which are imperatives which tells what ought to happen, although perhaps it never does happen. They are different from laws of nature, which relate only to that which happens. 3. Morality is embedded in entitled human mind. Amendment Kingsburg 36 or 7. The supreme principle of all moral judgment lies in the understanding that of the moral incentive to action lies in the heart. This motive is a moral feeling. You must guard against confusing the principle of the judgment with the principle of the motive. The first is the norm, the second the incentive. Motive cannot take the place of the rule. Through these obligations, paternalism is achieved, and even more so proves that the reporters ought to have the right to protect the identity of confidential sources. Contention 3. How my value of paternalism not only encompasses autonomy, but also privacy and self-concept. Reviewing my definition of paternalism, it values personal autonomy in of itself and the well-being of an individual, which is self-concept. Cover Privacy, Autonomy, and Self-Concept, Volume 24, 87. Start quote. In our age of electronic surveillance, centralized database, and computerized socialization, the topic of privacy is eliciting a good deal of attention, but what exactly is the value of privacy of freedom from surveillance or information gathering? The view I shall argue for here is that privacy is a necessary condition for something of basic value, the development of an autonomous self. Autonomy requires a conception of self for which privacy is indispensable and necessary to the development of autonomous people. Privacy is more than just contingently good. While it surely does secure us from misuse or abuse of information about us, its value goes beyond such contingencies. On the other hand, privacy does not seem to be intrinsically good. It is difficult to articulate what is good about privacy without connecting it to other more basic goods. The view proposed here then sees privacy as more than contingently good, but not quite valuable in itself. A defense of the claim that privacy is necessary for autonomy turns on exhibiting the role of privacy in the formation of self-concept. The concept of self has empowered to determine one's life. It will be argued in requisite to acting autonomously, and privacy is needed for such a self-concept to develop. End quote. Because paternalism covers autonomy, it must also encompass privacy. You cannot have autonomy without privacy. Cupper then argues that privacy is not valuable in itself unless accompanied with autonomy and self-concept, which my value of paternalism does. For these reasons, I strongly urge you to mark negative ballot.
All right, perfect. Thank you. Did that take anybody off guard a little bit? So what was the strategy that she was using? Did she agree or disagree with the resolution? She agreed. Her very first line is, I accept the affirmative, that this is, yeah, we should do the affirmative. But what was your strategy?
Well, so I agree with the resolution, but I disagree with the affirmative side because they're arguing that they're arguing something. They're arguing for the United States system of anonymity in courts, while we should be using a different one, not the system we use in the United States.
So it's a counterpoint, as in I state my case, and then she takes why her case would be better than mine in this situation.
So here's one of the biggest pet peeves that people have about debate. What are the rules for Lincoln Douglas debate? You have your time, 6373463. You've got AF and neg values and criterion are not a rule for Lincoln Douglas debate. It is wide open. And that's what frustrates a lot of people, because Sarah may say, she agreed with the affirmation, that's against the rules. Is that against the rules? No, it's a strategy. And judges sometimes get that confused as well, especially those judges that are kind of new. I essentially believe there's 4 categories of judges that we need to prepare our students for. Number 1 is the common parent judge. Common parent judge is, hey, you're required to provide a judge for a tournament this semester for your grade. And Sarah goes home and says, Mom, we need somebody to do this. And Mom says, well, I've never judged debate. I'll show up and do it. How common is that? All the time, right? Number 2 is the debate coach. They're my favorite. Why? Because debate coaches should have a basic idea of debate. And all of us as debate coaches have one thing in common. We want people to learn and to understand the debate. And so debate coaches usually are the most kind and open-minded of the judges. The third judge is the college debater, who did really well in high school, and then they have all these theories about debate that they want to see happen. Oftentimes the challenge with college debaters is while these two are debating, the college debater is debating in their head at the same time. And college debaters are usually really off the wall and just let anything go. They're just like, whatever, we'll just, yeah, go. I want to see something extreme. I want to see something cool. And that's a challenge. And then the fourth judge, I just had it in my head, is the sorry, I'm just going to go back to the parents for a second. I did have a fourth one, I can't remember. The fourth one is the parent who may be considered a professional judge. Somebody that knows what they're going on, maybe the parent's an attorney, kind of understands how things go back and forth. So really, you got your parents, your past debaters / college debaters, and then you've got your coaches. And your debaters should probably understand how to go through all those. Anything about the progressive debate that you thought went well? I guess nothing went well. What does she do really good at? Who understands paternalism? How many, to go back to our different types of judges, how many parent judges would understand what paternalism is? How many debate coaches understand what paternalism is? What does she really do a good job at?
Keeping the judge in the dark.
No.
Oh.
She defined her terms. She defined both, paternalism, right? She gave a pretty clear example. Now, one recommendation I might have for her is to slow down at that part, depending on the judge. If it's a college debater, go. Just go. If it's the mom and dad judge, slow down on that part.
Because they're still looking at your number, matching your number to their ballot.
Yeah, probably. Or like getting the timer going. But yeah, it's okay to go fast, slow, slow, fast, 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 slow. In fact, really, really good debaters that she read, actually, I've seen much faster, no offense. But yeah, that was pretty fast.
You could understand a lot of that.
Right?
You could? Oh.
Yeah.
Well, that's another thing. People that go fast oftentimes think they're better than they are. So they think everybody can understand it. It's not the case. And I would really, really, really focus on speed drills as a coach.
They're all wrapping up concerning the grass, so just to let you know.
I've got another 3 hours.
I know you do.
We'll be
You
done
could
in 2
give a
minutes.
whole series on this, and I may work on that this year when he's not administratively busy.
Give me 2 minutes.
Okay.
She also, categorical imperative, she did a good job explaining that, right? So she told you how she was doing. What made this a progressive debate was she accepted the affirmative, which catches a lot of people off guard, and she ran a counter plan, which is completely acceptable in Lincoln Douglas to do. A counter plan is we're going to do this instead.
Can you tell us what harms? Like I heard harms. What,
Yeah,
I don't
I
know.
said I accepted the affirmative harms.
So had I proposed any harms for?
What would happen if we didn't go with the affirmative? What bad things would happen? I'm
Okay.
accepting what bad things would happen. Sort of.
Okay.
Yeah,
I
so
agree.
had I presented harms, she's just accepting the fact that either way it's gonna happen.
Which is debate kind of 102.
Okay.
It's not necessarily a basic debate, but the affirmative always wants to say this is why we need to affirm. It's because in the status quo, the harm is there. So therefore, you need to affirm the resolution to prevent that harm from happening. So that's what she's referring to. And that should be the basics in everybody's affirmative case. If they don't establish harms, you can say, why are we going to affirm something that really doesn't fix anything? We can do something, but if we're doing something just to do something, why focus on it? So the affirmative has to show, for example, this one here, and so in democracy, civil disobedience is morally justified. The affirmative has to say, in a democracy, people are oppressed, and if people are oppressed and they can't say anything about it, then that's not a true democracy. That is a harm. The minority is underrepresented. Therefore, we need civil disobedience for them to blah, 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 right? All right, I appreciate it. I will send out those things through Tanya, to y'all, through to the group meeting or group page, or whatever. If you have any other questions, feel free to stick around. I'll be here for another couple hours.
And what's your name?
Scott Pettit.
Are you willing to share your email?
Yeah, let me write it up here. If I can find which one works the best here. So it's just simply Scott.Pettit, P-E-T-T-I-T. We're gonna have to go over here so I don't mess up on my P-E-T-T-I-T at theworldslongestemail.com. That's Summit Academy Schools. .org. SummitAcademySchools.org.